Hi, welcome to another episode of Easy Peasy with the Smithsonian. I'm Allison Leitner. I'm an instructional designer here at the Smithsonian, and I'm here with my colleague Tess Porter, as well as Jim Reese from the Washington International School and Fernanda Garcia from McFarland Middle School in DC. We are here today to model some more Harvard Project Zero thinking routines. Fernanda is back with us. On Monday, she modeled the routine unveiling stories the way that she would do in a teacher professional development setting. And today we're going to see how she uses that routine with her students. So as we get started, we'll start with our social emotional learning opener. When was a time when you wish a teacher had known more about your cultural identity? So go ahead and post that in the chat, and I'll turn it over to Tess.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Allison, for that great question. My name is Tess Porter, and I'm a museum educator here at the Smithsonian. At the end of today's session, after we finish hearing from Fernanda, I'll share a collection that includes all of the resources we'll be looking at together today, alongside other helpful resources that provide some more context, background, and extension opportunities, including a direct link to the collection and webinar that Fernanda facilitated for us on Monday. Throughout the bulk of today's session, I'm going to be hiding behind the screen sharing, but I will be back at the end to share that collection with you. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Jim.
Thanks, Tess. Hi, everybody. I'm thrilled to have Fernanda back with us today. Fernanda and I have been working together for about 4 years now through her work at McFarland Middle School in DC Public Schools here in the Washington, DC area. I work at Washington International School, and I've been part of a group that started back in 2012 called DC Project Zero. And our aim is to bring Project Zero practices to Washington, DC teachers in a meaningful way by creating all kinds of free opportunities to come to workshops and learn together, but also by having conferences. And we also manage or support a number of research projects. And that's how I've gotten to know Fernanda, because she's been involved in 3 that we've been part of. And what she's going to demonstrate today grows out of some of the work she was doing back in 2016-17, and then has built on it over the ensuing years, related to global competence. And we're indebted to Veronica Boix-Mancia from Project Zero and her team up at Harvard for developing what we call global thinking routines. And she's going to use one of those today again with you, as Allison mentioned. So it's great to have you, Fernanda, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Fernanda Garcia, and I've been a teacher with DC Public Schools for the past 10 years. Currently, I'm a teacher leader of instruction for the dual language program at McFarland Middle School, which is a global studies school with 545 kids who come from the local neighborhood, the larger Washington, D.C. area, and several of our students are immigrants from all over the world, with the largest concentration coming from Central America. Our school staff reflects this diversity as well, which makes culturally responsive teaching a must-have as a framework for teaching our students. In my school, about 49%, or 72 of 147 children who are Ls, or English learners, in 6th and 7th grades, are reading at the entering and the emerging phases of English acquisition. So using culturally responsive teaching practices is key to help them access our content. And when it's paired with something like thinking routines as an instructional tool, these students are able to closely examine and process complex ideas with the support of visual art, music, movement, discussion, and by asking lots and lots of questions. So of course, this doesn't just support our Ls. When used as a tool for scaffolding thinking routines, support a diverse range of learners, either by breaking things down into bite-sized pieces or extending thinking from what's visible to what can be created or imagined. Today's session is going to, again, focus on using Unveiling Stories routine, but this time we're going to be focused on using it with students in a classroom. Because we'll be using it to generate ideas that will inform students' subsequent interpretation of a fictional text, a routine like this can be tricky to facilitate. As students look at paintings or any other artifact that's coming from the viewpoint and imagination of an artist or a writer, it is sometimes easy for them to generate prior knowledge that's based on stereotypes and assumptions about the identities and experiences of the subjects in the paintings. As facilitators, we want to move students away from generalizations from assumptions, potential bias, and stereotypes by explicitly calling these out and asking students instead to shift towards the evidence they see in the artifact. Is there anything present in the image that supports the statement? Is there anything in the image that counters or contradicts this statement? A really useful thinking routine to pair with this is what makes you say that. When you bring it in during these types of situations where students might be making assumptions or going, to stereotypes, what makes you say that asks students to provide evidence and a rationale for their interpretations. So I would just caution and make sure that, if you find students are just bringing in bias instead of really focusing in on what they're interpreting from the piece itself and from what the artist may have intended, a routine like that would be super helpful. So today's artifact is titled Where Angels Feared the Tread 4. As I selected the piece to pair with our academic content, which is the play A Raisin in the Sun, I chose a piece that would help us dig deeper into understanding people as a whole, as complex human beings, and much more than the simple story that they belong to X race or X class or X nationality. To underscore this complexity, I've decided to open this routine with a clip from the play itself, and this is something I would do with students, right? I would start with just a clip, and so we're going to watch this 30-second snippet. Again, this is from Raisin in the Sun.
Be a doctor anyway. So crazy about messing with sick people, why don't you go be a nurse like other women? I'll be what I want to be. With somebody else's money. It's mama's money. He's my father too. And mine, and Travis's grandfather too. Browbeating me isn't gonna make her give it to you to invest in some harebrained scheme. And I, for one, say God bless mama for that. Are you listening to her? Are you listening to her? Please, just get out of here. Get on to work. Come on. Nobody in this house is ever gonna understand me. Cause you a nut. Who's a nut? Just you. Thee is mad, boy.
So as we can see in the clip, characters in a book or a play or even a painting are far from flat. There's a lot going on below the surface, and it's our job as readers or learners or thinkers to use the information that the artist or the writer gives us to dig deep into understanding who this character is and what he or she can teach us about the world. So considering this, let's look at this painting using Unveiling Stories to explore what the artist is trying to share with us through his work and how those ideas then can start impacting our interpretation of the play. If we look at this painting, Where Angels Fear to Tread 4, the routine is going to ask us to sort of examine it in layers, with each layer providing a distinct viewpoint of the events depicted in the painting. So this is going to require us first to zoom in on the details found in the painting through different lenses. First, we're going to zoom in, and we're going to go to the top left quadrant of the image. And we're going to take note of what we see as we slowly move our eyes down towards the lower left quadrant. We're taking in lines, colors, objects, maybe feelings, mood, tone. We're going to scan over to the lower right quadrant. Again, taking note, what do we see? And finally, we scan slowly up to the upper right quadrant, taking it all in. Small details, large effects. Based on what you see, the first question in the routine asks you to form a statement to what is the story. For the purposes of time today, we're going to skip the first and last question in the routine. If you want to know how to use those, you can refer back to Monday's session. Today, we're going to focus on the three in the middle. So after we sort of form a statement to what is the story being told in this painting, it could be something as simple as, well, Jim, why don't you share us? What do you think is the story? Something simple that would maybe come to your mind.
Morning at home.
Okay. So you can see that there's evidence in the painting that would maybe, lead you to say something like that it's morning, that they're in their home, it's a couple. Now what we're really going to dig into is the second question. What is the human story? What is the story that the painter is trying to tell us about these particular people in this particular place with these particular objects? What is the human story? Jim, you want to start us off?
Sure. Two things caught my eyes in particular that lead me to think about the human story. One is the actual eyes and where each of the two main characters are looking. The woman in what looks like to be a bathrobe is looking straight on, almost at us, and then the man is sort of looking off to the side at something else. So it almost seems like a reaction. And then the other detail I was looking at is that in the window, it looks like two angels coming down. And so to me, there's something in the human story, perhaps about the angels protecting them, or there's some kind of protection or something like that. I'm looking over them.
Okay. So students would write a statement, sort of synthesizing what that story would be to them. Okay. Just as Jim did, they would synthesize it and tell us this is a story about a couple who is being protected by angels, and then maybe they could add a little more to sort of expand that. Why might the angels be protecting them? Okay. Then we're going to move into the second question. All right. The second question asks, what is the world story? What is the story that this painting about these subjects might tell us about the world? How do we extend the story to the larger world? And again, you're going to be generating some prior knowledge, drawing on what you already know, have experienced, seen, or heard. What are some ideas we have? What is the world story? Or what might be the world story?
So I see for the human story, I think there's a tension in between the two people that we see depicted. They seem like they're uncomfortable with each other, and the kettle boiling seems like they're focused on their emotions and not on sort of basic things happening around them. And that makes me think of everybody at this moment who's stuck at home or staying at home with their partners and with their families, and there's nowhere to escape tensions that always come up naturally that you would normally have.
It's true. So then how do we, so could you maybe synthesize that into a statement? How do we take that initial human story and extend it to a world story? What kind of statement could you craft?
That with nowhere, this is a tough one. With nowhere to escape to, tensions build in between people.
Okay. And this is true maybe around the world, right? This is true not only for these people in this place. This isn't necessarily just true in our city, or for those of us that are acutely living the quarantine, right? This is something that can apply to people all over the world and to situations that extend beyond quarantine. Okay, right. Great. So you can see that, immediately when you start asking about what's the human story and what's the world story, you start digging in and you're drawing on ideas that you have about the world and you have about people, and you're achieving what we want, which is to start looking at these subjects, and then subsequently these subjects in the play, as more complex human beings, as part of a larger world, right? And again, that's going to expand the students' comprehension, understanding, and appreciation of literature.
And Fernanda, I was going to draw attention just to a couple more comments. Stephanie wrote that people are connected but may see the world differently and perhaps be unaware of external forces. And here that could be the angels in the window, but sometimes people are unaware of those forces, and that's maybe a universal idea that connects us all. And then Jonathan was really focusing in on the mugs. And he was noticing that there are 4 mugs, what looks like 4 mugs there, but yet we only see 2 people in the picture. That makes me think, are the angels coming for breakfast? But he's wondering, is it representing 2 people who are somewhere else off the canvas, or are there two people missing? Maybe they've been lost or something along those lines, but it brings up that kind of questioning that we wonder about. I also was thinking about, in terms of the world story and the connections, that there are signs here of mourning, like the bathrobe and the pajamas and the kettle brewing and the coffee cups. So that these kind of universal signs of mourning and breakfast and things that we might share.
Oh, that's wonderful. Again, very rich discussion. A lot of, higher order thinking is generated through these types of questions. And again, those are the things that we can use as catalysts to really get students collaborating with each other and learning from each other and sharing ideas. So we're going to go to the last question that we're going to focus on from the routine. And that is, what is the new story? This is always a trickier question to ask students, because again, it takes you maybe a little bit away from the literal and what you actually see directly in the painting, and now you're sort of extending it into, I'm creating a little bit, I'm extending it. What is something new that I can say about the world, about people, about this painting, about people like these? What is the new story? You can focus in on certain objects like, the angels and what their role might be in this painting, or what their role might be in life according to your interpretations. But what could we pull out as a new story that extends a little beyond the painting itself?
So Stephanie's posted that the body language seems guarded, and the expression on the man's face and the woman holding her robe closed, and asked if that suggests a hostile world.
Okay.
And that connects to, I think, what Allison said earlier about thinking contemporaneously about the world we're in right now, what's happening with COVID-19, and that we are stuck inside and with very little opportunity to go outside and to interact with people anymore. And so that tension can rise. So maybe that's the new story. I don't know when this painting was painted. So, but it could be, in thinking about what is new in our world. Certainly in the past 2 months, we've got a completely different world we're living in than we lived in before.
So if you're familiar with the QAR strategy, this is a text to world connection, right? As you're thinking about the new story, you're connecting what you see and what you've sort of started to understand about the message in the painting or potential messages in the painting, and now trying to relate them to the world, right?
Yeah.
And as you're doing that, you are creating a world story, but then you can also create a new story, a new point of view, a new perspective, a new way to look at something like quarantine.
Fernanda, Abby asks if you could define what QAR means, what it stands for.
It's a question-answer relationship. It's a reading tool where there's 4 types of questions, connections that are made. It could be text to text, text to author, text to self, text to world. And so you would sort of look at a text making those different levels of connections. QAR, question-answer relationship. There's a lot of information published about this strategy online. You just look at a QAR, question-answer relationship. But I've used it a lot as a scaffold for struggling readers. And it's a great way to get kids asking questions about what they're reading, which of course is going to extend their understanding. Okay, so would anybody else like to share what the new story might be? Again, you can, if kids get stuck with the new story, you can always go back to the routine that I mentioned at the beginning, which is what makes you say that. So is there anything new that, a new story that can be told if we, for example, focus in on the expression on the man's face, and we could do like a brief see, think, wonder, where we see character, we take a close look at what the painter has included about the character's face, about the character's stance, about the character's the person's outfit, and then we can start thinking about, okay, so what might he be feeling, what might he be thinking, what makes you say that, and then extend that maybe into a new story. Okay. So again, the beautiful thing about these routines is that they really a lot of them pair well together as scaffolds. If you look at the collection, which we're looking at in a little bit, the collection that I created for culturally responsive teaching, there are a lot of different tiles with routines that you can use it and you can pair together. to sort of make this content more accessible to your learners. All right, so now that we've gone through the 3 questions and come up with some stories about this painting and extended our understanding and interpretation of it, I want to take us back to the fact that we were using this as a springboard to sort of start off our reading of A Raisin in the Sun. Taking off, my teacher hat and going more into the coaching role, I want us to think about it as teachers. Think about our experience of this routine as we examine this artifact and as we facilitated this routine. As a teacher, what would the value be of opening a lesson on fictional text with this routine and this artifact? What value can we find as teachers in opening a lesson with a routine like this? In a painting like this specifically, that we're trying to sort of make connections between the painting and then ultimately the characters and the text that we'll be reading. What value could be found here? Instructional value.
Do you want me to start just responding,
Sure.
Fernanda, and then we'll see if some people write some things in the chat as well.
Yes.
I think about Lorraine Hansberry and what she was trying to do with A Raisin in the Sun. And by the way, yesterday was her birthday, so happy birthday
Awesome.
to Lorraine Hansberry. And Malcolm X's birthday was yesterday as well. And I learned that through the Smithsonian. They put out an announcement about that. I know Lorraine Hansberry was really interested in portraying African-American characters on the stage in her literature as fully realized complex beings. And so I think an exercise like this sort of draws us into the human quality of what's going on here and really focusing on these 2 characters. They're so center in the picture. We wonder who they are. We wonder what's going on in their lives because there's such the focus in this. And maybe it helps us then pay really close attention as we start reading to the characters in her play.
Mm-hmm. And again, it's because, when you're reading a play, so much of the focus is on the dialogue itself and what the characters are saying to each other. But if you look at the painting, it's much less about what they're saying than what they're doing and how they look and their expressions and the objects that have been chosen to place around them. What is all of this telling us? How does this add complexity and layers to the character itself? So again, if you're sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so Carol and Stephanie were in the chat talking about that too, talking about using this kind of object shows that interpretation is a complex process, and that using something like this would really spark thinking about characters and motivation and context and looking carefully at details and their interpretation. And Jonathan says that it allows, we can open students up with questions on how to create a narrative and how to tell a story, because they're inside the walls rather than merely a viewer or a reader.
I love that idea. Yeah.
Yeah. And Elizabeth too, along the same lines, so that students are able to start forming their own opinions right away before the teachers are sharing their interpretations.
Exactly. The focus is on what the students understand and what they're interpreting and what they're sort of starting to imagine, right? As they look upon this artwork, and then later when they look upon the text, they're able to sort of start making those connections and extending those practices.
And,
so the last question, oh, sorry, Jim, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Abby just had this really interesting comment that I think is worth mentioning too. She said she keeps thinking both with this this conversation and the artwork and with the clip that we saw from A Raisin in the Sun about how all families are complicated. And she thinks it helps develop that interest in relationships that are happening and maybe connecting with your own family. So kind of understanding universality of family relations and family dynamics, and that things are never always as they seem, and getting into that so that you understand and maybe can connect your own family to the family that's being depicted.
And that sounds like a new or an untold story. So the last question I want to close with before we start looking at the collection itself is, one of the main purposes of using this routine in my setting is to incorporate it as part of our culturally responsive teaching approach. So how can looking at a piece of art, using this routine where students are then telling stories, making connections and extensions, how does it offer you insights as a teacher about the student's worldview and the student's cultural perspective? Why is knowing that or being able to see and hear that valuable to you as their teacher and as the curriculum designer? Thinking about it from a culturally responsive teaching perspective, how does this routine or thinking routines in general, open up students' worldview and cultural perspectives? Why do I, as a teacher, need to know or need to hear and experience their worldview and their cultural perspectives? How does that impact me? So that's something that, it's one of the key questions that, we still need to think about when we're designing content is like, what do I need to know about my students? What opportunities do I have in this text? What opportunities do I have in this instructional approach or this tool to help me understand them better? And how can I use that understanding to then redesign or rethink the curriculum, the content that I'm using, to make sure that they're maximizing their engagement and maximizing their buy-in and maximizing, their learning.
Fernanda, one thing that I think about with that question is the way that these routines so often just open up conversation, and how students or learners build upon each other's ideas and sort of shift their perspective sometimes by hearing what others say. There's no right or wrong answer when we're exploring, and therefore you're just kind of messing about with these ideas, and it just helps you form a richer view of the world and a richer view of who you're in a classroom with or in a Zoom call with or whatever it might be. And so I think there's this huge value in using these scaffolded questions to surface those things. And then the teacher is benefiting from being able to understand where her students are coming from and how they form their opinions and how they shift their opinions and so forth. So it just feels so in a sense very freeing to be able to have these kinds of conversations.
Yeah, and that's the thing, that they're not prescriptive. You're not going to know exactly where you're going to end up and what the students are going to say and think and understand. There is a lot of freedom that comes with thinking routines, and it's one of the beautiful things about them. So that's why I love using them in my classroom and with my students. I feel like it really helps increase student ownership of learning. Great. In multiple ways. Right. So thank you guys so much for going through the routine with me, and that was a lot of fun. Thanks.
Fernanda, I know we want to get to the collection, but we have two questions in here that I think would be really valuable to have you answer. So Carrie says she's curious about how to effectively bring in the context of societal systems that have impacted and or influenced the artists and writers used in this routine.
So, well, definitely you would have to you could do a couple of things where you ask students to look at the painting from that point of view, where you're thinking about what are the systems at play here. Another option would be to sort of provide a couple of different systems that could be at play and have students explore the artwork through that. I mentioned this on Monday, but there is another great thinking routine that was designed by Agency by Design, which is called Voice and Choice. And with Voice and Choice, you really are breaking down a system, and you're looking at it from multiple angles, and you're thinking about who created the system, who participates in the system, whose voices are present in the design of the system, whose voices are absent. And by bringing in this routine is sort of like an opening into examining what the different systems might be, and then pairing it with a routine like that to then really dig into a system. For example, a system of racism, or a system of white supremacy. I guess that's more of a system. Or you could even use it to examine something like public housing. So all of these things, again, these routines can be paired together so that you can. But again, that would be part of like a larger module. You definitely wouldn't do that in one class period. This would be something that you would design that would you'd start small and build up to something like the Agency by Design routine, which takes about 3 days to do, but is very, very valuable in terms of that type of understanding that you're describing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. The other question we have is from Carol, and she says she's wondering how you go from gathering informal data about students' context to designing or redesigning curriculum and lesson plans.
Yeah, most of the time it's about reflection. It's about looking at what the student said. So it's very helpful to try to document the comments that are being made by the students in the routine. So one of the things that I do is I have the image on the smartboard, and I'll be annotating notes on the side of the screen, or I'll be annotating right on the painting some of the ideas that students are coming up with, and then I save that image. And so then later I can go back and look at it and start reflecting and thinking about what were the key ideas that were present, what are some of the misunderstandings that I see, or some opportunities to expand this tomorrow and subsequent lessons. And so that, it's really important to try to document the students' thinking in some way. Another time, and many times, what I have is a sort of a capture sheet where students are documenting their thinking. They turn those into me, and then again, I can look through this documentation and I can start thinking about what are some patterns, what are some ideas, what are some clarifications that need to be made, and then that is going to inform, where I'm going next. But it does take time in terms of like looking through the student work and then doing some reflection and some thinking, which is a lot of times challenging to find as teachers time to just sit and think, about what the students are saying, what the students are understanding, and where that can take you then in the lesson. A lot of what we do is with culturally responsive teaching is a lot like, action research, because again, you don't always know exactly where you're going to go, where you're going to end up. You have your goals, you have your questions, your essential questions, but the students' interest and the students' understanding and questions really tend to guide where you're going. So you might not always end up where you thought you would, but usually end up in a much better place because it's where the students wanted to go, right? And they're the learners and they're the consumers of what we're designing as curriculum writers.
Great. All right, I think we're going to head to Tess and let her walk us through the collection for today. There's Tess again.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much, Fernanda, for everything you shared. I want to take this moment to kind of restate that this is part of a series of webinars that we've been holding twice a week for the last couple of months. All of those sessions have been archived and are available both on YouTube and on the Learning Lab. If you search for Easy Peasy in the lab, you'll find it. This session will also be archived and made available at the same link you're watching it at today. So if you want to rewind, share it with a colleague, you can do so. Each one of these webinars comes with a Learning Lab collection full of resources covered in the session and other resources that can help extend it. You should see on the screen right now the one created for this session. You can find a link to this in the YouTube or Facebook description of today's session. I've added a link there. You can also find this if you search the lab for Easy Peasy. In the last few minutes that we have together, I wanted to talk about some of the things you'll find in this collection. So at the beginning of the collection, we've pulled in a link to the clip from A Raisin in the Sun that we watched together today, the artwork we looked together at with Fernanda and Jim, as well as the Unveiling Stories routine. Here, if you click on the Information tab, as you're viewing the resource in detail, you'll see information from Harvard on how to use this and the types of thinking it helps support. So really kind of a restatement of all of the things that Fernanda shared today. It'll also show you the two other questions that we didn't use in exploring this artwork. Additionally, in the context and background section, we've included a video that talks about kind of the power of Project Zero thinking routines, as well as a link to the webinar and Learning Lab collection for the session that Fernanda presented for us on Monday. If you're interested in seeing the resources she shared then, watching the webinar itself is included there. In the culturally responsive teaching section, we have two resources that Fernanda pulled in. The first is a PowerPoint of an inquiry cycle on culturally responsive teaching. And the second is an article on culturally responsive teaching and current policy in the US. Two really wonderful resources for learning more about culturally responsive teaching and learning some techniques to begin to use it in your teaching practice. Related to this, in the lessons section, there is a really wonderful collection developed by Fernanda, Culturally Responsive Teaching, a Guide for Urban Educators. What Fernanda has done here is she's kind of put together a bunch of instructional triads. I think she said to me that she pulled these together to give teachers the tools that they need to be able to try out culturally responsive teaching techniques. So here, Fernanda's done a wonderful job of including multiple instructional triads, resources that work particularly well with it, alongside Project Zero thinking routines and guidance from her that you can kind of try out yourself and adapt and use with your own students. Finally, at the end of the collection, we've also included a link here to today's webinar, so it's easy for you to find, and a link to more online courses from Project Zero. So it's our hope that all of these resources will be helpful to all of you as you move forward from today. And again, the link to that collection is included in the description of today's YouTube video and Facebook live stream. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Allison.
All right, well, thank you. Thank you so much, Fernanda and Jim. Thank you so much for everyone who joined us. I certainly learned a lot, as I always do with these, and really appreciate it. We will be back on Monday at 1 p.m. for another Easy Peasy with the Smithsonian, and we hope to see you there. Thank you.
We'll be back on Wednesday.
Oh, not Monday, Wednesday.
Yep.
Monday, yes, Monday's a holiday, so we'll be back on Wednesday. Thank you, Jim. Wednesday, 1 p.m. So we'll see you in a week.
Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Thanks, Fernanda.